This show is really exciting, and it shows some of the work in here is some of the best contemporary glass that's being made today. And it has, all the work in here, almost all the work in here, has roots that go back pretty far. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm going to make it fairly brief, but I'm going to start after World War II. Post-World War II era. Before I start, what I'd like to do is talk briefly about the history, and then I'm going to ask Peggy and Zintra to say talk a little bit about how this show got together. And then I'd like to have a question and answer period afterwards, because I'm sure a lot of you have questions, and we can talk in any detail or depth, especially about the techniques that are involved here. The aesthetic part is it's all pretty exciting too, but I don't like to pass judgment on any particular work of art, so I'm much more versed in the technique and the skills that are involved in handling glass. But like I said, right after World War II, there was especially in America and Europe, there was a big push to reestablish their economic systems there. And so a lot of countries invested in universities and schools to develop, especially in the crafts, to promote their industry. And I say this because the glass movement in the United States sometimes takes credit for a lot of the glass techniques and a lot of the promotion of the glass, contemporary glass, and it really shouldn't, even though we have the largest population of collectors and the largest population of glass workers in the world. There was a lot going on in Europe at the time that we gained a great deal of knowledge from. So, for instance, this piece over here, in Czechoslovakia, behind the Iron Curtain after World War II, and in Sweden, but not so much in Sweden, they started working a lot with cutting glass and casting glass. And this is a piece by Anne Wolf, who I actually have worked for in the past. Before, when she made vessels, I believe a lot of pieces for her that she used for her acid etch pieces. I don't know. If you look down her website, it has a few of those on there. I actually have one in my own collection. But this work has roots from Czechoslovakia in the 1950s. Stanislav Levinsky and his wife really were supported by the government, and they actually have pieces all over the world, Tokyo Airport, etc., that are very large-scale cast glass pieces, and then they're cut and polished. And it's a lot of this stuff wasn't known at the time when the glass movement started. The glass movement started in the United States in 1962 with Harvey Littleton and Dominic Lubino, who were at the University of Wisconsin. And they had, before that time, there really wasn't much interchange between Europe and the United States in terms of techniques and things like that. Glass is always tied to technology, so they were the first to develop a small glass melting furnace. And that enabled artists and creative people and craftsmen to get a hold of the glass. Now, going along with all this craft industry and the post-World War II industry is all the crafts were all promoted. But glass really suffered because nobody could get their hands on it. It wasn't easy to use. So that's where these techniques of casting on a small scale, large scale actually, developed. And even so much as the lampworking stuff. Now these pieces are exceptional in size, of course, but they're reminiscent of the lacework type of glass blowing that you'll see at the fairs and things like that. But, like I said, nothing's ever been done on this scale before. So this is brand new. Painting on glass, which is a great example here, along with this terrific kitsch art. A lot of Italians did a lot of painting in glass. So So they developed those techniques. We gained knowledge from all these different countries. This is really the only example of blown work in here that's virtuoso style blown work, which the Italians, of course, are famous for. The first American glassblowers went to Italy and met maestros over there, and then eventually they started bringing them over here. And they wanted to come over here. The tradition in Europe is to work in the factories or for design industry. The tradition here started with universities, primarily. There weren't a lot of connections between the glass industry in the United States and the glass art movement in the United States. In fact, very few. In fact, there weren't even very many designers in the glass industry in this country. In West Virginia, there were several companies that went under, I think back in the 1970s. But they didn't even have designers in their industry. So there's much more connection between art and industry in Europe than there was here. When we started bringing over the Europeans over here, they brought all these techniques over with them. And I just wanted to point out that these techniques have really been established here, and the artists that work in the United States, even though this is a fairly international show, really have taken advantage of all the techniques that have developed in Europe. Does anybody have any questions? Would you like to talk a little bit about how this show evolved?
Okay, then I have questions. Yeah, I'm Peggy Haas. Centra is over here, and we co-curated this exhibit, and it's probably, I don't know how many we've done, but we've been doing it for about 25 years or so. And this was the most difficult one we've done because not just everybody can establish a glass studio because there's just so much equipment involved as I see it anyway, right?
Yeah, the technology is really tied to materials. Yeah. The one really great thing about this show is that the show is called Concepts. And normally when you talk about concepts, you talk about that the idea is more important than the material. But I think what's really cool about this show is that the material is essential to the concept. And it's used in in very different ways in this room. But each way it's used it really brings out the concept behind the material itself. So that's kind of an interesting development in this work.
And Sandra and I started collecting and going to see exhibits of glass where we could for maybe 5 years, but there wasn't a slot, so to speak, until fairly recently. And so this show was, we had a very short lead time in getting it together. And so some of the artists we contacted were overcommitted and would like to have been in the exhibit, but they couldn't. But as it turned out, we were really pleased with what we got. We didn't sort of say, okay, we want something that's done with lamp work, but we found this through Jane Sauer Gallery in Santa Fe. And I didn't mention also that Jim had worked with Doug Heller, who has the, would you say, Premier Gallery?
He's the Premier Gallery in New York, yeah.
For art glass. And so we were able to contact some artists through him, but it made it more difficult for us for those reasons. But otherwise, Sandra, do you want to talk a little bit about how we came about different?
I think we pretty much covered it. I guess what gave us first idea, because Peggy and I, we have put together several exhibitions, and we have worked with fibers and clay, and we always keep looking at the media now that was traditionally more a crafts media, but we particularly like to stress that it is now an art medium. And we were, I think first what we started, we were looking for the fiber show that we put together, and as we were looking for that, we were saying, there's really wonderful work going on in glass, and so in the back of our minds, we were always saying, that the glass is really exciting. Wouldn't that be really exciting to do something in glass? So that, I think, got us going, and as Peggy said, we wanted to bring in a variety of techniques as well as the artists' very different approaches to the way they express their concepts, and that is why we have a great variety. I think what we saw was that, and to bring it to Lehigh Valley, these are things that you see in galleries and go into private collections, but we're still the university being a teaching institution, that we should have like a sampling of perhaps, and I hope that Peggy and I will have achieved that sampling of what is happening today in the glass world.
I think you did. This is a really wide-ranging, terrific show.
Is anyone
Great
else
example.
working with kinetic sculptures like these three?
In glass, not that I know of. These are pretty unusual pieces. They're almost as if the glass doesn't matter.
And of course, she didn't make the glass.
Wonderful, yes.
This is
Right.
the one that is different in that sense, but the use of glass.
The interesting thing about some of the titles, you can tell, I noticed this one over here. It's called The Frequency of Seeds. And seeds are the tiny bubbles that are in glass. And they're considered a flaw. So this glass that's handmade, obviously, or either made on a machine to be handmade, all these little bubbles and everything that create the beautiful patterns and rhythms on the wall are all, seeds and faults in the glass. So that's kind of an interesting observation.
Is that a basic tenet of glass?
Yeah, it's a basic technological term, especially for window glass producers.
Yeah. Well, you see it in the old, is that the same thing? It's in historic glass that has ripples?
Yes, it's the same type of thing. I did a project for Corning for Steuben, and we made these Christmas ornaments for them, and we were only allowed 3 seeds per piece, and only one of them could be on the top surface. It was a star form. So the seed thing in glass is very serious. And I don't believe that, I think in the best glass that's made currently are automobile windshields. There are no seeds allowed in automobile windshields. So the highest standard for glass is in your car, not at Steuben anymore.
Well, that's interesting because I had read this title as her concept having something to do with her great interest in Buddhist religion and in the environment, and so I thought she's talking about seeds here, planting seeds.
Right.
So, and this one, then of course this has the fabric in the background. The first one we saw first, these are all from courtesy of Heller Gallery, and the first one we saw was a series, and they were like waves, which appealed to me because I love the ocean, and you could, I think you could get, it's so meditative. If you stand in front of any of these for a while, you really begin to, you're in there after a while.
Of course, the artist's idea is also, she talks about
To do any casting, whether it's large scale or not, you use what's called high temperature plaster mold. It's a mixture of silica and plaster, regular pottery plaster. The silica adds a high temperature insulative quality into the mold that keeps it rigid until the glass forms on it. And then magically, at that temperature, when the glass is completely formed, it starts to break down. So the trick with casting glass is the mold has to be able to relax and release as the glass cools, because if it doesn't do that, then the glass will crack and break. So these molds are made to self-destruct in the second half of the process.
So making the mold is as much a part of the art.
Right.
That is.
It is.
That's what
it's a lot of it is.
Yeah.
And just like any other atelier or any other artist, they would make a model first, so that they could make multiple molds, if possible.
And what would that model be made from?
Well, it could be made from rubber, it could be made from plaster, it could be made from wax.
Rubber or wax or plaster. And these pieces that are Lampwork by, please.
That I was wondering about too, whether there was a mold for that or whether as it cooled.
I don't personally know exactly how these are made. I didn't get a chance to talk to Brent about it when he was here. But these can be built from the inside out, from one side to the other, just in the open air, because these pieces are all welded together with a torch. This is traditional lampworking, but greatly increased in scale. And I was wondering myself when I first looked at them, why they have this deep interior structure, and I think it really holds them together. I imagine if you made these just with the outside form, that they wouldn't even stand under their own weight. So I imagine that the inner structure really is part of the whole process. And like I said, they're all welded together. Each joint is welded together. Every curve is bent in flame. So there are a tremendous amount of hours of work.
Would you like to perhaps give a little more, if people are interested to know exactly what lampworking is?
Sure. Lampworking is working with a torch in glass, basically. And there are several different types of torches you can use. There are hand torches. There's stabilized torches that you can use in front of you. So you can, when I imagine, most glass lampworking is done on a stable torch in front of you. So you're actually holding the glass out in front of the flame to be able to move it in the air. I imagine that part of this could be made that way, but then the assembly would have to be done piecemeal with a hand torch to put these all together.
There's a question over here.
Yes?
Do you know how the photographic images is transferred for those pieces?
Not specifically, but I do know that you can silk screen, and then you can add color with an airbrush or a stipple brush onto the glass, and then it's, of course, fired after that. But I imagine that there's a process in here where it's partially silk screen from an image, but I can't tell you exactly how it's done. These are, by the way, this work is all slumped glass. So it's flat glass that's taken and cut into shapes and then melted and fired, and the enamels are fired on the glass at the same time. It's molded. And then these are all stitched together. Funny. Yes?
Would you talk about what the technique is, or if this is maybe too complicated, to
Anyone else? Yes?
I was recently at a glass studio in Sandwich, Massachusetts.
Mhm.
He told me that he throws potatoes into the molten glass, which forces the bubbles up.
That's an old glass blower's trick. If the glass, when you melt a tank of glass, and it gets a little bit too hot, it can do what's called reboiling. So when you throw all the chemicals in, you turn the furnace up. It goes up to 2,600 degrees or so. You hold it there for a certain period of time for all the chemicals to mix and to melt into each other. Then at that point, you want to stop that process when it's all mixed and it's all glass, it's all homogeneous. And at that point, the bubbles are all still in there, for instance. If you keep it at that high temperature longer, it will reboil. And what reboiling is there are chemicals that are in the glass mixture that enable it to melt at a lower temperature. And they're somewhat volatile. And if you hold the glass at that temperature too long, these chemicals will separate out, and the oxygen will come out of those chemicals, and then that introduces new bubbles into the glass that weren't there. That's called reboiling. If you take a potato and put it on the end of an iron rod and shove it down into the glass, it will create a lot of bubbles because it's basically a solid piece of water. But those bubbles are big, and all the little bubbles are little. Seeds are little. So if you put big bubbles into the glass, they take all the little bubbles out with them when they rise to the surface.
The other thing I was surprised is that although this was a small studio, he said his gas bill is over $5,000 a month. So I was wondering if that is similar to what you pay at the banana factory.
Yes, it's about the same as we pay. Yeah. Very expensive hobby.
That probably explains why there are why this came so late and
Right.
so few
Yes.
people were working.
Back when Harvey Littleton and Dominic Albino started, they turned to some engineers, glass engineers, and they told them outright that they couldn't do it. You can't melt glass in a small batch because it won't turn out right. But they proved it wrong immediately. They thought, I think, 100 pounds of glass in a very small furnace. And that was the beginning of everything. All their students, who were pretty much professional teachers at the time, all went out from Wisconsin and went to California, went to Rhode Island, went to all parts of the country and started their own glass studios. And that's where my generation came from those guys.
I have a comment before I have other questions. I want to introduce Mark Wansidler and Jeff Ludwig.
Oh yes, they did a terrific job.
Because those are the people, I mean, Sandra and I got our names up here, and all these people get their names on it, but you don't see Mark and Jeff's, and they do the designing, where the pedestals are going, what height different things are going to be shown, and that really makes the art, the bundle of the whole exhibit. And so we do the fun part, running around and seeing a lot of art, and then they take whatever we bring to them. And no, they didn't say, oh no, we need 6 of those or whatever. And they make this whole the whole thing work. So I want to pay homage.
Not only is it hard to make art look good as a pedestal, but glass is also very fragile and also very heavy.
Another question I got at the very beginning when we were working on this, and I told people we were doing this, they said, oh, are you going to have a Chihuly? Would you care to comment on why we might or might not want a Chihuly in our exhibit?
Well, when I first walked into the show, I was pleasantly pleasantly surprised that there wasn't a Jubilee in the show. And I'll tell you why. He's come to represent all there is in glass. And there are a lot of great artists out there that do great stuff. And although I really admire him and his work, and I think he's done more for glass than any other artist in glass, and he deserves a tremendous amount of credit. He's also a little bit in the way of all the other artists. They're doing great stuff too, but not very much. He only lives so long. But it was nice to see a show that didn't have.
Yes.
But his work is great.
I want to ask more about these that are, I've read the process, and apparently there are many layers, and this Noel Hart is from Australia, and his images are inspired by wild parrots from where he lives at the edge of a national forest in Australia, and so that was his inspiration for these, and some of these look very feather-like, but he describes it as he has two people who help him, and as they're working with the bubble, then he has them add color.
Right.
What kinds, and then there's something on this that makes it sort of acid etch.
Right.
What kind of pigment?
Well, the interesting thing I was telling this gentleman earlier, the interesting thing about this work in particular is it wouldn't have been able to have been made not too long ago. Recently, there's a company called Spectrum Glass that developed a system called System 96. And System 96 is all the different colors that are made out of glass are made out of metal oxides and glass together. And some of them are dissolved in, and some of them are suspensions. The opaque colors are usually a suspension, and then the oxides are usually dissolved actually in glass to make the colors. When you do that, each color has its own difference of how it expands and contracts. And you don't normally think of glass expanding and contracting, but when it's cooling down from very high heat to room temperature, it does expand and contract. And it does it at different rates with different oxides or different chemical combinations. Makes sense. Not only does it do it at different rates, for instance, but it may two different colors may expand and contract at the exact same rate, but at different temperatures. So you could have a piece of glass that has two different colors next to each other that supposedly have the same rate of expansion and contraction, and yet one does it at 1100 degrees, and the other one does it at 1000 degrees. So they break. The glass breaks. So with the miracle of System 96, we can now put millions of different colors together, all in one piece, and they all fit together. They all expand and contract at pretty close. It's not perfect, but pretty close to the same rate. So the way that we buy this glass is in powder form, in frit form, and in bar form. And you can either pick up a chunk, preheated piece of glass, a chunk of glass, and you get a solid chunk of color. They also make rods too. Or you can take some clear glass and then roll it into a powder or frit form of the color and coat the outside of the piece. If you look at these up close, you can see, there are layers of color in here. So, but this may be a background color of black, and then they might make a stripe of this reddish or brownish color around this way on it, and then streaks of another color on top of that. And then at that point it's a three-dimensional form, and then when you apply it to the main body of the piece, you can smash it out into a flat form, and then as he blows these pieces up, it all becomes homogeneous in the surface. But if they all start out as individual chunks of color and pieces of color that are three-dimensional, and some hold that illusion still in the glass.
painting on a flat surface first?
No, these are actually all made in probably in a three-dimensional spherical bubble. And then they're all applied and then pressed in so that they all become of symmetrical shape, and then you blow it out, and then you can flatten it to get these flat forms like this. But they would be round when they started out, and then pressed flat.
So when they start to blow that, he doesn't have total control over what's going to happen. Is that right?
He doesn't have total control, no. But he has a pretty good idea of how it's going to come. The more you do, the better you get at it. And then he would have a team, helping him. And the longer you work with a team, the more they all know what's going to happen next.
Do most people who work with glass work with a team?
And most people do. And that comes from the apprenticeship tradition, as the teamwork tradition as the Venetians and factories in general. They work in teams. Not one person can't do every job that's involved in making something.
Although I think that
They divide it out.
the pieces that we have here, I believe that Glasgow works by herself as well as
Right.
Tavita. There are two people that we know who are. I'm not sure about Lepay.
Require blowing, right?
Right, these are all slumps, so they're not.
That's different, yeah.
These are, obviously painted.
Tavita's works are blown and woven
His
and all
are,
that, but
yes.
he made that very, very clear that they're very personal pieces and he always just works by himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that large word is full of cinnamon,
Right.
which is interesting.
Which one?
Yeah, he's really coming from a folk art craft tradition in these pieces.
He is from Tonga, living in Australia, but he was brought up in Tonga in their tradition and their beliefs. So he uses all of those in his work. And they're actually quite symbolic. I just take briefly that the glass part, he says that he's a man living between two worlds. And that the glass part is Australia, the contemporary life. And the weaving or the twining connects to a wood, and the wood and that is his Tongan life. And so he's trying to weave them together into one, but he's a man trying to live between two worlds.
He starts with myths. There's one about male and female, and somehow the gods destroy the male and cut off his head, and she finds it. And there's all kinds of stories that influenced him, and they came from his grandmother, as did the techniques for doing the woven parts. And this is him, and this is Seisel. He's used these. If you look at these very carefully, both of these have very, very sort of hidden designs on them.
They're cold work, there's carving on them, and they're like representing tattoos. And tattoo in their culture is used for protection. It's to give safety. So he cold works all of these cold works. Actually, the one that is with the cinnamon, there is this a similar story to what am I thinking of? A phoenix. It is a bird who makes a nest of cinnamon, sets himself on fire, and then appears as a bird. So that is the story. And I don't remember the other one, what the story was. But as Peggy said, they all have very personal, or his traditional stories that he shows in his personal way.
You're talking about color now. Will someone be able to make these things? I mean, Mike Young's
Yes.
next step be working with color and that
He
technique?
could.
Would the rods come in colors?
They do.
Put your order in now.
Do you have questions?
Yes, I wanted to have a big comment about the De La Torres career. Last year, they did something of each, and they synthesized so many different diverse techniques. I wanted to have you maybe comment about the way they approach their work, the way they work as a team in the studio, and they're fantastic to watch them work. I filmed some of this.
Yes, every year we do a fundraiser at the Banana Factory, and it's become a glass event. And this last October, we were fortunate to have the Delatorre brothers come. And we had them as visiting artists. They worked for 2 weeks. And in the middle, they gave a demonstration at our fundraiser. They donated a couple of pieces to us, raise money. And it was very exciting to have them come and work. I'm not sure who we're having this year yet.
Do you want him to talk about the process of
Yeah,
work?
well, you know, like for instance, I don't know whether it was Janex or, you know, one of the brothers carried a notebook and he made a sketch, and they would gather around, they would look at the sketch,
Right.
and then everybody would run off in all directions. One would go to get a top of glass and start with some thread, the other would do something else, and then it would all come together suddenly, and one of them would draw something on there, you know, they would pull stringers and rods.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like there was very little discussion while it was happening.
And it was pretty close to that sketch.
People don't matter. And yet, you know, they just look, okay. Magic.
That's different.
Glass blowers all kind of know, it's a vocabulary that we all know very well. And if you know, for instance, that you need this shape, then that person needs a certain amount of glass to do that, and then they will tell you what color they want, so you can go off and do that. Get it all ready. You probably know exactly what shape they need, and then you bring it over, and the gaffer, who's the person in charge, he's the one who applies the glass and puts it on and does all the cutting, whatever necessary for that. And these are done in a very similar way. So these guys would start off, one person would have a big bubble, and then the two guys would go off and go get their glass, and he would tell them exactly how he wanted it to look, and then they'd bring it over and apply it. It's very similar. All these processes are the same, basically. Yes?
Could these two lattice pieces be turned upside down and either rest on what would be the bottoms or suspended from a ceiling? Are they strong enough to do that?
You'd have to ask these guys.
I don't think so.
Would they just crumble?
Yeah, I think that, I think particularly this neck would not support. And specifically when Brent came and told us how to move them, you know, he suggested that we use kind of broadhand and distribute the weight as much as possible. On the bottom, and not to grab onto the individual pieces. He said if we were going to get into trouble, it would be because we were grabbing onto the individual rods and shifting the weight from the whole to the part. So I suspect that they would not hang, and I don't think they would do very well upside down. That one maybe, if you could get it to balance on when it's.
Are they heavy, Mark?
They're incredibly light. We were trying to guess about what they weigh, maybe between 5 and 10 pounds each. They're really light.
What do you think they weigh?
Between 5 and 10 pounds.
Yeah,
Each. Yeah, they're really lightweight.
And how much did Ann Wolf's weigh?
Animals weighs close to 300 pounds. We had to, Jeff built a special pedestal that would hold it up, and it took 4 of us to lift that out of the crate and get it into place. And we didn't want to move it very much once we got it.
It's heavier than water. Does anyone else have a question? you don't have to have those textures. And,
How does it keep the holes from closing up?
it looks to me as though all the openings are all cut afterwards, and there's some sandblasting going on here. These holes are obviously drilled first before it's slumped because they're soft.
That's why
It gives them a nice kind of stretchy quality. Cast glass is relatively easy to handle because you're doing the same thing. You make a big mold, and then you fill it up with big chunks of glass, raise the temperature, so there's no handling. But glass blowing, like first these pieces are probably fairly heavy. How much do you think they weigh each? 15, 20 pounds?
Yeah, 20 pounds.
And when you're blowing glass, you can't get too close to it because normally you work at about anywhere from between 1,500 to 2,000 degrees. So, and even with lampworking, it's the same way. Lampworking is just on a smaller scale. It's the same temperatures though. But for glass blowing to handle big things, you work on an iron rod or a metal rod. And that rod is about 5 feet long, so you're never, you can't get much closer to the glass than about a foot, except when you're handling it on the bench. If you want to see it, you should come to the first Friday at the Banana Factory, because we do it every first Friday of every month. And we have different artists come in and demonstrate. So that's a great way to realize that. It's much easier to watch it being done and then you understand it to me explaining. But it's a balancing act, and you need several different people to help you because it is heavy. And different people take over at different times to ease, through the process, so you don't get too tired.
You mentioned the sandblasting. I established that they don't have it at the Banana Factory. But when is it used and why is it used and how?
Well, it's used as an opaque producing thing. It gives a little texture to the surface. In the case of these pieces, these are sandblasted, and then they're also acid etched. And that's an unusual process that's not in very common use anymore, but hydrofluoric acid is used to etch the glass. And it's a tricky process because the glass stops the acid etching from happening. It goes in so far into the glass and dissolves the matrix that holds the glass together. But once it does that, that matrix or the paste of the glass stays on there and stops the etching. So you have to continually take it out of the acid and wipe it off and put it back in order to get a nice, consistent quality surface to it. But it's so dangerous that people don't do it very often. Hydrofluoric acid is it doesn't burn your skin. So what it does is it goes through your skin and dissolves the calcium in your bone. French glass artists in the 1800s whose fingers turned to rubber because he did it so much. He didn't realize what he was doing. And his bones just dissolved.
Well, how would they do it in modern times so it's...
Well, rubber gloves, great ventilation and scrubbers and all that stuff. It's pretty hazardous. It's not, like I said, it's not done very often. There was a company in West Virginia that did a lot of it called Fostoria Glass, and one of those companies that closed in the 70s. And they had huge vats of hydrofluoric acid just opened.
How many lawsuits?
OSHA wouldn't like that.
Jim, maybe would you care to comment about what kind of work you do and what?
I haven't been able to do a whole lot of my own work since I've taken this job at the Banana Factory.
What would you like to?
I would like to, but my work since I moved from New York has taken on I've completely changed my work from more of an abstract expressionist style of work that I used to work with lots of colors. And living out in the country now, I've grown very close to nature, so all my new work is about trees and tree forms and patterns of trees. And it's just starting to evolve. I have a show actually at the Balm School right now, a very small show. I think it's over this weekend, unfortunately.
22nd, I think it comes. It's until the 22nd.
But if you care to go see it, it's over there. And I do a lot of drawing, and I haven't had a lot of time to let the work evolve yet. It's in its fledgling stages, it's developing. My work is not sensational anymore. It used to be kind of sensational, and now it's very calm and meditative.
Was your earlier work that you said, or the expressionist, abstract impression, similar to Noel Hart?
Yes, yes. Not quite so much color, but I used three-dimensional forms of hot glass rods, drawings on the glass. They weren't so much these forms of color like he has. It would be a background color, a couple of different colors, and drawings with rods on the glass, and then solid pieces of either clear or colored glass that would refract the color out. It was more three-dimensional, but they were still vessels, which was the common thing going on in the 70s was the crafts movement. It happened in all mediums. They would take their original format, which in case of glass would be a vessel form, and then react against that or with that form, and that's what my work is like. And ceramics went through that period too, where they take platters and plates and bowls and then put punch holes in them and stuff like that. It's kind of a growing process that all craftsmen have to go through, I think, to finally get to the art that they really want to do.
I think one of the most interesting things about glass as a medium is that you could go so far with it in so many different directions. How many people here work with glass? I know a couple do. Is that okay? You. And see, there's so many ways you can go and so many things you can do. Like Brent Young, who did these pieces that he calls, there's a Matrix series, and he's head of the art of the glass department at what he calls the CIA, Cleveland Institute of Art. But his early work I saw in Wheaton, and they were traditional vessel forms and bowls, and he used fossil images and I don't know if they natural food, but in the form. So, and he's just started doing well. The tall piece was made just for this show, and he's just been doing this in the last couple of years. And he's sold everything he's made so far, and these sell for about between $10,000 and $15,000 to $20,000. So, but it's very time consuming doing it. But it's interesting, and he said he used to drive down to Florida all the time. He made bowls and pitchers and useful objects, and did the whole craft circuit, doing very useful things. And then he started doing this, and wow.
It's a whole new life.
Yeah. So, any other technical?
Just a thought. Jim, you mentioned about that internal dynamic within the crafts movement, reacting against traditional forms,
right,
that sort of thing. And that being kind of impetus for people working in these various media. At what place does that either, I guess I'm wondering about the question of craft and the question of art, and how those two communities relate or don't relate, or if
well, I think the fact that happens, that process occurs, is that same struggle. It's the development of the art process or the concept trying to take over the handcraftedness. Now, lots of people can make that leap, and it can still be a craft. It can still be a craft object. But more often than not, it's not ever looked on that way. But in glass and in crafts, they're always going to be tied to the technological process. So you can't entirely separate it away. So that's why I think that there's been this stigma about craft. And you can say, I mean, things, ancient craft pieces in Japan, pottery pieces, they're not craft. I mean, they're beautiful art objects. So where you draw that line, I don't want to say, and I really don't care that much about it. That's the critic's choice, you know. But there is that struggle, and but that during that struggle doesn't mean that you're on your way to making the real thing.
Right.
While you're doing that, all that stuff you make all along the way is the real thing, because it's the process of being an artist or a craftsman. But you know, there is lots of us crafts people who start out that way. Some have definite philosophies, and they do not want to make art; they want to make craft. That's, you know, valid, just as valid. And some are struggling with that. You know, some use the craft process, but they say, "Oh, I'm making art, I'm not making craft." But the attitude, although it helps you in a lot of ways, sometimes it's really has nothing to do with the work itself. It takes somebody else looking at the work to see what it is, I think. Or at least the artist has to reflect a little bit, you know, in order to develop and grow. But I think the concept and the work have to be powerful together to make an art piece. Does that help? Yeah. Thanks.
So don't you think these pieces go beyond that? They've definitely gone beyond the craft element.
Well, yeah, there's very little craft left in that.
Right.
I mean, the panes of glass are made by a machine, but they're hand affected to be that way. You can't, if the machine was running at, you know, optimum, they would look like a regular piece of glass, so a very clear piece of glass. So these are effective in a craft manner, but the fact that they are, you know, a pane of glass, you know, denies that. And actually the fact that the glass and the shadow of the glass, or what's going on with kinetic qualities of these pieces, almost overshadow the material itself. So they, you know, I don't think that they're necessarily any better than these kitschy pieces here, because the craft in here is really denied too. You know, it's there, but it's you know, the message is just as strong as the way it's put together. In fact, the way it's put together enhances the message.
It's like pushing the envelope of the craft, you know, taking it to that further step, to that concept.
Well, I think that the work in this show really is going